the record button. So we made the decision to kind of share our presentation as folks were coming in, but because we want to see folks, we're going to do kind of introductions here at the beginning without our presentation shared, and then we're going to do some flipping back and forth. So sorry if that gets a little bit disorienting. I don't know. We'll just try it out and see how it goes. So since I'm already gabbing, I'll tell you who I am. I'm Megan Brown. I'm the Executive Director of College Access and Strategic Initiatives. So that means I get the great joy of working with externally funded programs here at Central Carolina. So that means that I get to work with a team that does the full spectrum of proposal preparation and project implementation, which is what you're here to learn about today. And so Kelly and Rebecca will introduce themselves next, but they are my teammates in that endeavor. And then I also get to work with a great group of folks who are leading externally funded programs to support student access and success here at community college. So that includes TRIO and Job Corps and FNS, which I'll tell the whole group about at the end of the presentation. So Kelly, I'm going to pass it to you next.
Sure, thanks Megan. I'm Kelly Klug, I'm coordinator of grants development. So my main responsibility is all the work leading up until the submission of a grant, figuring out all the details and writing the actual submissions. I guess I'm passing it to Rebecca.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rebecca Lysash. I'm the grants performance coordinator. So Kelly and I kind of work parallel. She helps to get the funding, and then I work with the existed funded programs at the college, providing support and technical assistance.
All right, thanks everybody. Now I'm going to do my rapid fire sharing here. Okay. So everybody sees the presentation now. Just wanted to give you a quick peek at the agenda to get you oriented to what's going to go on. We're going to give a quick introduction to the whole grant making process. This is Grants 101 after all. And then we'll go into some specifics about pre-award and then post-award. And then we'll spend the last little bit refreshing everyone's memory about the current programs we have at the college and what our plan is over the next year. And then we're going to take a little bit of time to ask you about your needs and tell you why it's important that we know what your needs are and to tell you how you can tell us your needs. So that's what we've got in store for today. And so the first thing, we kind of want the group to get oriented to who's here and what roles they are and who has experience in grant making, whether that's in kind of the beginning stages of proposal preparation or actually in implementing a grant. So I'm going to unshare now so that everybody can see who's going on. And this will just be a volunteer thing. So if you want to share, go ahead and pop in and let us know who you are and what experience you have with grants.
And they can do that in the chat if they want.
Yeah, that'll work too. Hey, Melinda, are you wanting to say something, or you're just practicing raising your hand?
And raising my hand.
Okay. Good to see you.
You too.
Jennifer Dillon is our director of our Job Corps Scholars program, which is a really exciting grant. And she is great at making sure that she plugs that program. So you can see her in the chat.
That's 100% correct, Scott.
I would say
ideas.
the reverse is true, that we walk into Scott's office and say, we have a really crazy idea. What do you think? So it goes both ways. Awesome. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Alex. You helped us with a grant recently, or an award. I don't, they come in all different types of names. Amanda has a really fun experience when she wrote a grant pre-pandemic that changed entirely during the pandemic. right. You're welcome to keep putting stuff in the chat about what experience you have, but since we're limited on time, I'm going to go ahead and figure out how to share my screen again. Okay, so I told you that the three of us here work the entire spectrum of the grant making process, which you see illustrated so beautifully here by Kelly. And so the very first part of that starts by either finding funding or coming up with an idea and looking for funding. We often call that our chicken or our egg. It just depends on the circumstance which comes first. And then we assemble the proposal. And I say assemble because it's definitely right, but as anyone who's worked on one knows, it also is pulling a whole lot of people and documents and ideas and signatures all together. And then it's submitted, reviewed by the awarding agency. And then if you get that lucky email, which only happens some of the time, but that's part of the process, we start the award setup and then the project implementation and evaluation. Kelly, Rebecca, anything to add to this slide before we get to your section?
Nope, we covered it.
All right.
I think you skipped a slide, but that's, I think, oh, there, all right. That's what I was expecting. So I'm going to talk about the pre-award and selection phase. And Megan, go ahead. You can go to the next one.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I just, it jumped to this one faster than I was expecting. So I think the easiest way to look at grant funding is as a process of matching projects with the goals and missions of particular funding organizations. On the screen, you'll see a number of different missions of different foundations, organizations that provide funding to projects, and you can see that they're very varied. And so they all have a mission that they are seeking to fulfill, and they're looking for recipients, grant recipients, who can help them do that. Megan, go ahead and change this next slide. So I'm going to show my age here a little bit, but the process of grant making is actually a lot like the old dating game show. Next slide. If you look at the grant making process as the process of trying to assess compatibility, in the grant making dating game, the funder is the contestant, and the potential people that they want to date are the applicants for grants. And so the funder is asking questions and trying to assess which of the different applicants are most compatible for fulfilling their mission. Sometimes the funder will also have an assistant in this process, and you'll see here the Jay Leno character is what it might be a community foundation, for example. Some of those organizations bring a whole bunch of funders together, and they manage the grant making process for the funders. So you'll see that sometimes as well. Next slide, please. So you have to look at funders as partners. While there might be a temptation for us to change our mission or try to be whatever it is the potential funder wants, the best way to look at them is as a partner. Sometimes there'll have to be some compromises, and the match might not be completely compatible, but if both sides work together, that usually makes for the most successful grant making process. So as Megan mentioned, there are two different sort of scenarios that we will come across. Sometimes we have an idea for a project, and then we need to find funding, and so we go out and look for grants. Other times we might hear about a grant and then know that there's some way we can implement or find a project at our institution and go looking for an idea. So you might see both scenarios where you come to us with an idea, or we come to you with a potential grant and try to find a project for it. Okay, next slide. So Megan, in our summary, we talked about 5 tips in various phases of the grant making process. So I'm going to start with 5 tips to increase your odds at getting a grant when one comes down the line. First, having an idea of what you need to do your project. Very often we'll hear, oh, I need this piece of equipment, or maybe I want to do this initiative and I need staff. Maybe you need materials to run a particular class or a particular project. Maybe you're, like I said, eyeballing that shiny new piece of equipment, or maybe you just need other team members. That might be other schools, it might be partners, it might be subject matter experts. These are all things, if you know what you need, start making a list now. Also, if it's for equipment or supplies, start getting quotes. Know the approximate size of your budget, because when you come to us with that, or we come to you with an opportunity, we're going to need to gather that information. And the more that you have done up front, the faster that process moves along. Next slide. Second, build support materials for your project. This could include just having a project description, a little summary. Maybe you've heard case studies of people doing similar projects at other institutions. Any supporting articles and research, that's a big thing, is very often we have to have sources for why we're doing a particular project. Also, having brochures, budgets, statistics about your students, any of those things. Certainly, our department can help you gather that stuff, but whatever you already have or you can find that's very specific to your project will also help the process. 3 is to consider how you would define project success. All of these funders want to make sure that they're investing their money in a place that's going to have successful outcomes. And those outcomes can vary depending on the type of project. This is just one slide showing some various ways that you might define success. It could be satisfaction results, it could be pass rates for classes or for licenses, success rates, retention rates, graduation. All of those things could be potential project successes. So start thinking about what success would look like for your particular project. Those could be both qualitative and quantitative measures. So it could be survey results or it could be actual numbers. Fourth, and this is very important but often overlooked, is building relationships with funders. And you might think, well, I don't know any funders. You'd be surprised. A lot of different vendors and suppliers are affiliated with foundations within their company that make grant requests. There might be trade organizations that have foundations affiliated with them. So try to find those types of relationships and find those types of partners and build relationships with them. RPM Foundation is a great example of a very specific organization. They're interested in restoration and preservation of historic automotive or automobiles, and so they have been a funder for CCCC, both in scholarships and most recently in giving us project funding for a restoration of a 1944 Ford that our automotive restoration program is going to be working on. So find these types of partnerships, impress them, build those relationships. You'd be surprised when those funding opportunities come about once you have that relationship.
And this seems most obvious with like private foundations and companies and things like that, but even our federal funders, organizations like the National Science Foundation and the National Institute for Health are always looking for subject matter experts to score other proposals. And that's the way that you can build a relationship with a funder before you even have a project in mind.
That's a very good point. And finally, number 5 is to establish partnerships, but beyond establishing partnerships with funders, establishing partnerships with other stakeholders who might be a part of your project. So that could be other schools, other organizations, groups that are trade organizations or subject matter experts in your particular field. Funders like to see collaboration. They like to see that there's already an established partnership there. And so if you start building those relationships now, when an opportunity comes along, you can quickly dive into that particular project. Okay, next slide. So the second, my second 5 tips are characteristics of a fundable project. Number 1, having clear project goals. So knowing what you're trying to accomplish. We always like to talk about SMART goals. So specific and measurable, attainable, realistic, time-oriented. Those should apply to your project as well. And there's sometimes people think, oh, it's just I just want a piece of equipment. Well, there's got to be goals even associated with something like that. Is it going to help your students succeed? Are they going to have greater success rates? Are they going to be able to find a job more quickly because they had training on this piece of equipment? So every project, every grant project will have goals and some sort of objectives affiliated with that. So work on thinking about that as you start defining your project. Measurable outcomes come with project goals, and sometimes it might feel ridiculous to measure outcomes, as demonstrated by this slide. Who's going to measure a sandwich, or who's going to measure the number of times somebody uses a piece of equipment? But you'd be surprised how important those numbers are to funders. So making sure that you have outcomes defined and they're measurable is very important. On a plus side, as ridiculous it might seem sometimes, having those numbers makes getting funding in the future easier. So with every project, whether you show success or even if it's failure, in the case of grants, often showing need is equally important. So if a project fails, but the next time you want to go get funding and you want to add something to that project, just because your outcomes didn't look great the first time doesn't mean that you can't use that to get another grant in the future. Next, a good project tells a strong story. So you want to draw the funder in, you want to make your project compelling. A good example of this is we use the Dreamkeeper program. Many of you are familiar with that. And we tell a story about our students and their financial needs and challenges, and that draws the funders in. And then we measure success for those students who get Dreamkeeper funding. So did they stay in school? How long did it take them to graduate? And those statistics we can use to tell the next story to the next funder and show success. So that it's great to have a story around your grant project as well. Number 4 is that your project adds to the body of knowledge. So funders don't want to just help you. Most often they also want to help the greater good of their particular field. So if you're trying, maybe some examples of adding to the body of knowledge might be proving that a best practice works, or applying a best practice in a different type of environment, building on prior research, applying a new technique to a new learning technique or a new technology. So think about it in terms of not just what you need for your project, but then what could you share to the rest of the community about the project and that you received funding for. Funders love that idea of scalability, that they'll give money a few $1,000s for this project, and that will go out and help the community in a much larger capacity. And then finally, that a grant has organizational support. So you're going to be much more successful in getting a project off the ground if you have the success of, or have the support of, both your department chair, your dean, depending on how big the project is, maybe going all the way up to your vice president or even the president. Having that team behind you is going to make for a much more successful project. And many funders will ask for letters of support from the organization as a whole or from your partners. So make sure that you gather your troops around you. Next slide. So that probably sounds like a lot of work before there's even talk about writing. And this slide, I think, shows that grant writing is really 90% about defining the project and following instructions, making sure that you've got goals and concepts that match what the funder is looking for. And only 10% of it is actually writing. So you'll find, if you haven't done a grant with us before, that I'll ask you a ton of questions, and I'll push for things like objectives and defining a project plan, because that's really the hard part of the project and the grant writing process. The rest of it is just putting it into words. One more, Megan? And so I'm going to just talk very quickly about selection. This is sort of the in-between process. We're not going to talk a lot about it because it's really out of our hands. Once you submit that application, the funder is going to bring their team together. They're going to review it. Often there's a matrix of points that are assigned to different sections in a request for proposal, and they will match it up and make sure that you've answered all the questions and then assign point values. And at some point, they'll make an award decision. And as Megan said, hopefully you get to the positive and you get the award. But if you don't, very often they will give feedback. And we're in that process right now of a number of grants that we did get rejections on, but they are providing us with feedback. Some funders, it'll take years before you can get a project. We worked with NSF, and we applied for the Step Up program. I think it was 5 years, or 4 or 5 years, and we got it in the last one. So that's a part of the relationship building process, getting that feedback, improving your grant. So don't be upset if you don't get it on the first time. You're just learning and getting more information for the next grant. And so that's all I have about the pre-award process. Megan, do you want to add something?
So yeah, I'm gonna let this group in on a super secret. Kelly is a very prolific grant writer. We do a ton of projects, and I don't actually know what our success rate. It's never been important to me to track it. I couldn't tell you because if you're getting every grant you write, then you're not being very brave in your grant writing processes. Because we recently had a grant that was scored absolutely perfectly and not funded. So there's a whole lot of different variables that go into whether your proposal is funded or not. But we should still be excited about writing them and submitting them and not getting discouraged by denials, because like Kelly said, we get feedback, we build relationships, and then Kelly is very skilled at taking the effort that goes into one project and saving it and using it in projects to come. So a no is, not the ideal, but it's never a bad thing either, because we usually can build off of that. And a lot of times in hindsight, we know why we got the no's, because it led to the ultimate yes that was the right fit for the institution. So that's all I'll add. And when we do get the yes, then we say, oh no. and then we look to Rebecca to help us. So I'll turn it over to her.
Right. So I'm going to talk about a few tips for the award implementation portion of getting a grant award, and then how to keep your funder happy. And I'm going to try to not go down any rabbit holes, because these could all be their own presentation. So ready, Megan? The next slide, please. Okay, so all right, perfect. So the first thing to do when we get a new grant award, if you're a new director hired on or a staff member of a new grant program, is read the RFP and proposal. And if you're not familiar with the term RFP, that's the request for proposal. So that's the literature that the funder puts out when they solicit proposals. And that will really give you a good idea of what the intent of the funder is and what they're looking for in the project. And then, of course, the proposal that Kelly and Megan and countless others worked so hard to put together has a really detailed guideline and outline for what the grant program should look like. So often and I can say this from when I got hired to start new grant programs at the college, you come in and you think, all right, this is my grant program, and I'm so excited, and that's true, and that's wonderful. But a lot of the decisions have already on how you're carrying out the grant are already written down and articulated in the proposal, and it's really important that we follow those, because that's the reason that the grant was funded. So the first thing to do is to go through page by page in detail the RFP and proposal to figure out what were we funded to do with this grant project. So the second thing, and this really goes hand in hand with number one, is to create a project plan. So sometimes the way a funder wants the grant written, it's not intuitive to the way that you would carry out the grant. So you might have to kind of go through the proposal piece by piece and write down all of the action items that we said we were going to do, the timeline for when they should be done by, and who's going to be responsible for them. We are responsible to the funder to carry out the program the way that we were funded to do that. And so it's really important to kind of dissect that proposal and make sure that we have a plan of action on how we're going to carry out everything that we said we were to the best of our ability. And this project plan is something that we're working on more in our office to be able to support new directors with, perhaps even having it in place when we do hire a new director. So as that happens, we hope to be able to work more closely with each of our project directors. But in the meantime, each project director should have a really clear idea of what are the objectives of the grant, what did we say we were going to do, by when, and how are we going to make sure that happens. Okay, number 3, clearly define roles and responsibilities. And this goes for a lot of different people. So first, within the grant team, whose roles and responsibilities is it going to be to fulfill which action items on that project plan? Or is it the role or responsibility of a different part of the college or a community partner? So a couple examples of that is we've had grants where we've written in that we were going to work with our career service center, and so what's going to be their responsibility versus what's going to be the responsibility of the project director and staff, or we're going to work with a community partner. I know our Youth Build program works with Habitat for Humanity, so what's going to be Habitat for Humanity's role or Youth Build's role? And ultimately, in that example, Youth Build is the grant, and so the project director and the grant would be responsible for fulfilling the terms of the grant. And so as somebody working on the grant, you really want to make sure your partners understand what their roles are in helping you make sure you're meeting your objectives and what the roles of each of your team members are. Right. Number 4 is build collaborative relationships. So oftentimes, especially with a big federal grant, it can feel like you're working in a bubble. Your participants in your program, they may not be enrolled in any other part of the college. You might have your own site. You're not working directly with a lot of other people from the college on a day-to-day basis, but you are absolutely not alone, and you really should rely on the expertise of those around you, other grant directors, and then other departments of the college. And depending on your role prior to coming to a grant program or your role working within one of our grants, you may never have worked with the administrative services component of the college. And I will say building strong relationships with purchasing, payroll, human resources, business services, marketing are all going to be extremely important to helping you get your grant program off the ground. Right. And last but certainly not least is developing policies and procedures. So this is especially an important focus of the first year of a grant. Again, especially for federal grant programs, our federal funders want to see us doing things, following our own policies and doing things consistently within grant programs. And some policies and procedures exist because we have them at the college, but as they are specific to your program, they probably don't exist. And writing down how we're doing things for program continuity and for consistency is really important in successful implementation, and then keeping your funder happy, which is what we'll talk about next. All right, so 5 tips to keeping your funder happy. And really this is almost a continuation of project implementation because they're not completely separate. So keeping your funder happy is of course important for us to get refunded in the future and for you to have a successful grant program. So number 1, maintain focus on objectives. I think Kelly talked about the importance of getting research and really being purposeful about creating the goals that are written into the grant proposal, and that's because they will follow you for the whole grant, and those were a big part of the reason why your grant project was funded. So all of your actions and decisions on how you're running your grant program should be supportive of completing the objectives. So keeping the objectives in mind and you really using that as a focus point in your decisions on how you're running your grant program is number 1. Number 2, make compliance a priority. So compliance is a lot of what I do and I'm on a day-to-day basis working with project directors in particular on ensuring their grant programs are in compliance. This is a much bigger deal for federal grant programs because there are extensive rules and regulations on how grants can operate, what kind of documentation should be kept, how we should gather data, when we need to report data, how we can spend money, what documentation we need to spend money, documentation for the time and effort of staff, and it continues. I will say, prior to working on a federal grant, if somebody had asked me, what are the main things a director does, I don't think I would have listed compliance as one of the top things, but it absolutely should be a priority of everyone working on the grant, but especially the director, because even if you're carrying out all of the grant activities, if you're not maintaining the documentation required of the funder or doing the reporting that the funder is required, all of that work is for naught. I mean, other than hopefully the benefit of the student, which that is not for naught. But is in the eyes of the funder and the grant, it's not going to necessarily be a successful project if you're not keeping the requisite documentation and doing the reporting. Compliance is bigger than just one grant program. It's something we do as a college, and so I work with directors on kind of those policies and procedures to make sure that we have controls in place to maintain our grant compliance and that we're doing things consistently across the college. So when thinking through compliance, absolutely, we would ask for you to come use our office as a resource and get kind of support thinking through your compliance plans. All right, this slide is not to be flippant, but following, oh,
Sorry.
but following the directions of the funder is really important to keeping them happy. You know, sometimes they ask for strange things that seem arbitrary. For a couple examples I can think of is we have some funders who want very specific types of communication, you know, an email in a certain format at a certain time. We have other funders who want certain language on any marketing materials or anything relating to the grant program. Some funders who want their logo on your website. Just so, sometimes they just have funny requirements, but they are important to those funders. So making sure that we're following them to the extent our funders wish we should is definitely important. All right. Second to last one here, budget and spend responsibly. And this is another one that we could talk about at length. So I will try to not get in too deep here, but there are a lot of rules, especially around federal grants, on how we can spend our money. And sometimes they can be frustrating, but we have to follow them. And even for private funders, they often have some kind of finicky requirements on how and when they want us to spend. The big cost principles that you will hear for federal grant programs is that all money needs to be necessary, reasonable, and allocable. So necessary is, would a prudent person think that expense, that's reasonable. Would a prudent person think that expense is reasonable? Necessary is it necessary to support project outcomes? And then allocable, can it be allocated to an objective of the grant? A large part of the director's job, again, that I don't think I necessarily appreciated until I was in that role, was really keeping track of every dollar and making sure that the documentation was there to show that each expense was necessary, reasonable, and allocable. And I think it's important beyond the director for everyone on staff of a grant program to have an appreciation for the cost principles and the constraints that we have to spend our money in, because it can really help with making good decisions about how and when to spend money. Sometimes money can be spent, but it's a much lengthier process because of some of the requirements around that, and it's really good for everyone to have an idea of that so we can get the ball rolling on things in time to be able to fully spend down our grant funds. All right, and the last thing here is communication. So this is really important to a funder, both positive communication and I guess really negative communication. So funders love to hear that the money they've invested in you is paying off, that you're having successes. They love to hear student stories. I mean, I love to hear student stories. I love when I get to meet with a director and hear about a success of a student. It really always makes my day, and funders feel the same way. Same thing goes for your team and really the CCCC community at large. Please share your successes. People want to hear about all the wonderful work you're doing in your grant program. Also very important is communicating any challenges or concerns with your team and with your funder. What a funder does not want is your grant to end and for you to say, oh, I wasn't able to do X, Y, and Z because of all of these barriers. A much better recipe for success with your funder is to let them know as those barriers arise. For example, we had to change a bunch of our budgets around because we had all this money allocated to travel that we weren't able to do with COVID. So as long as you can have an open conversation with your funder and kind of let them know when you're running into roadblocks, that's going to be a lot better for your relationship with them and for making sure that you're able to carry out activities successfully within your grant program.
All right. So that was a very quick run through of the full scope of grant proposal and grant implementation. So you just heard an overview of what can be years and years and years of work. So I know that's a lot to be thrown at you and it's a little overwhelming, but I'm going to leave you with 4 important takeaways that I just want you to remember these 4 things, and that's only. So the first one is, what a grant is and what a grant's not. And so you heard Kelly and Rebecca talk about that as they talked about the full spectrum of grant development and implementation. But a grant generally 95% of the time is not going to be just operating funds for your area, right? It's going to have some kind of programmatic focus, and it's going to supplement and enhance what we're doing with our operating funds. So that means that it comes with all the strings that you heard about today and all of the hard work that you heard about, but it's always worth it, and it is how at the college we've been able to accomplish a lot of the innovative and student-centered and teaching-focused things that we've been able to do. So the second thing I want you to remember is that even if that feels overwhelming, that's for good reason, but that's also why myself and Kelly and Rebecca have jobs here at the college. We're here to support you, and that we love what we do, and we want to hear from you. So don't feel too overwhelmed by the process. We wanted to give you this overview so you understood it, but also know that you can lean on us. The third thing is, I don't know if y'all can even see me, I'm holding up my fingers, but the third thing is that while Kelly, Rebecca, and I are here to support you, we are not the only grant experts on campus. I'm going to tell you now about some of our externally funded programs at the college, and all of the directors of those programs know a whole lot more about grants than they brag about frequently. So I'll just brag on them now and say that they work really hard, especially in the project implementation phase on compliance and budgeting and things like that. So I feel kind of silly saying this, telling you what our grant-funded programs are, but it's been asked for over and over again as a part of a PD session. So I'm going to tell you about some of them. And I'm actually, let me unshare so you can see me, and then I'll reshare again when I start talking about. My mouse doesn't want to work when I have it in share mode, so I don't know if it's going to let me. My mouse is having issues. Okay, maybe I won't unshare, and I'll just tell you about them. Okay, so back in 2012, believe it or not, was when the college got its first federal grant that was not by formula. So we've had Perkins a long time. Perkins is the federal grant that's given to colleges in North Carolina via formula. But in 2012, which was not that long ago, we applied for our first federal grant. So the very first of those was Title III, which brought success coaching to the college. We also then got Upward Bound Math and Science, which is a TRIO program that supports first generation and low income students in accessing higher education. At the same exact time, we got Veterans Upward Bound, which serves low income and first generation veterans in accessing higher education. So that was a huge lift back in 2012 to figure out compliance and implementation of federal grants. Before that, we had worked mostly with smaller foundation grants and some things through the state, some opportunities through the state that came up. And we had worked with, oh my gosh, my brain is breaking. I'm sorry, Golden Leaf Foundation, which is a pretty big foundation run through our General Assembly and an appointed board. So over the years, our TRIO programs grew. So now we have 6 of them. So we have 3 Upward Bound programs, which includes the Upward Bound Math and Science that we first got in 2012. Kevin Pearson is the director of those. He's been with us about a year. Before that, our very own Rebecca Lastash was the director of those 3 programs. So when she talked about how to get a grant program up and running, she's speaking from direct experience because when she came on, we only had 1 Upward Bound, and she helped grow us to the 3 that we currently have. We also have 2 student support services programs, which is commonly referred to as SSS. That is also a TRIO program. So in the same vein as the others, it supports first generation and low income students. However, it serves our CCCC college students directly. So I know Alex that the success coaches and Trio SSS are really linking up and thinking about how we can most effectively serve our students. But Jessica Rogers is the director of those programs. And so she has been living in the world of student support plus compliance and budgeting for a long time now. We still have Veterans Upward Bound, which is our 6th TRIO program. Oh, Alex, I'm glad. I feel really silly putting this list out there. So I'm going to keep going. You've given me a little bit of inspiration here. Recently, we added Youth Build and Job Corps Scholars, and some of our friends from those programs are represented today during this training session, and they are funded through the Department of Labor to help students who are 16 to 24 who have barriers to accessing higher education come to us and get different credentials that lead to in-demand employment in our service area. We also have a program called Food and Nutrition Services Employment and Training, and it's probably a lesser known program. It exists only in Chatham County right now, but it really supports students, both curriculum and short-term training, who are receiving food and nutrition services and getting to, through us and into employment. Let's see, what else am I missing? We have two Step-Up grants, two NSF grants right now, National Science Foundation. The first of those is Step-Up, which is a scholarship program, and Dr. Rodney Powell is the principal investigator, which is the fancy term for project director that NSF uses. And so he's been helping support students through Step Up. And then we also have an advanced technical education program through NSF that has been helping Andy McMahon in Chatham County create a new sustainable curriculum in energy effectiveness of different construction. So we have a lot of grants. I think I've named 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, about 12 right off the top of my head. But I just checked out our current portfolio, and we have over 80 active grants right now. So in addition to those large federal ones, we work with Emily in the foundation to work with companies and foundations and different donors within the community to apply for smaller grants that a lot of times directly support students. But my phone's ringing. My apologies. What I'll say about those is whether big or small as to amount of funding, the grant process that you saw presented today doesn't change much. So a lot of times a $5,000 grant is just as much work as a $500,000 grant. But when that $5,000 goes directly to students, it's absolutely worth it. So I just wanted to give you that picture of kind of what our now looks like, and then tell you what our future, really not too distant future looks like, what our current priorities are in grant programs and strategic initiatives. So we are, like the rest of the college, focused on college access and success and equity, as we are looking at opportunities come down from the federal government, and as we see foundations looking to support. Some of the ones that are on our radar right now are Title III, which I know probably all of you have heard me go on and on and on about, and I'll keep doing that for a while. We have CARES funds. You've all heard about CARES funds in the news. Those are grant funds. So we didn't have to apply for them in the traditional way because the pandemic did that for us. But the project implementation piece that Rebecca talked about, and the compliance and the budgeting, all of that still applies. So we're very lucky to get those funds, but they come with their own strings, and so we're working to work through that. So we're also looking at college improvement projects. So that can be anything from improving the physical look of the campus to building new programs at the college, whether that's curriculum type programs or student support programs. So we think that CARES in Title III will be a big piece of that as we go forward over the next year. And then we're really excited about over the next year looking at some teaching and learning grants. We've spent a lot of time over really the last 5 years making sure that our students are taken care of out of the classroom, which we feel is, everyone feels like is very important. But we really would love to find some super cool opportunities to support faculty and how they take care of our students inside of the classroom and how they can be innovative and, you know, really reach their dreams of their ideal classrooms and what they're doing in those. So there's a couple of those coming out through NSF that we're looking at, but we're keeping our eyes open for any type of opportunities that have to do with that. So with that said, we are a division that is constantly in flux. So I literally just sent Kelly a message this morning and I kind of laughed at it and called it Project of the Week, because that's what it feels like a lot of times. We're just rolling with what comes available and what the college needs are, and we try to stay really nimble and flexible. So we want to know what your needs are. I need to go to the next slide here. Yeah, what are your needs? And I want to say that we want to hear what those are, even if you don't have a funding opportunity that you can match up with that. I like to think of us as the connectors at the college. So we're seeing a lot of these grant opportunities come through our inboxes. And a lot of times if I can think, oh, you know, what about Lisa Smelzer? She has got some needs and let me connect her to that funding opportunity. That works really well for us as a college. It keeps us aligned with our strategic plan and moving forward cohesively. But if we don't have all the dots, we have a hard time connecting the opportunities to the dots. So we want to hear what you have going on, what your ideas are, what your needs are. So we have a form on our website, and I'll be really transparent. Our website needs a lot of work. We'll get there, but the form is fine. I'll share the form with you all after this, but also we're all pretty open door, even virtually. Send us an email or a chat or give us a Google call or whatever you call it. And me and Kelly and Rebecca are always really excited to connect with people across the college and hear what ideas they have or what their needs are. And even if we don't have something for you immediately, like Amanda said we would, we really will keep that in our list of dots so that when something comes down, we can connect and make sure that everybody is getting heard. So we just spent 49 minutes almost really just giving you the 101 on grants. So are there any questions that we can answer? I'm going to try to stop sharing, although my mouse is like not letting me. What if I hit exit? Oh, that worked. Oh, no, it didn't. I cannot.
Still sharing.
I cannot. It like will not let me move down. It's like.
Megan, while we're waiting for questions, I wanted to add a little thought about grant funding. Sometimes, you know, you might hear of a grant that's only a small amount of money. Yes, she did it. You know, like maybe something that's $5,000, but your program might be much larger than that, and you need a lot of different funding. It's possible to have a program that's funded by a lot of different organizations. You know, Dreamkeeper is an example of that. The ACES program that Bianca Stumpf runs is another example. I mean, we've got federal funding on that. We've got a whole bunch of smaller foundations. We've got arts councils. And so we will work with you to blend or braid, I guess is the term we use now, braid that funding and create budgets that take into account multiple grants. So if you see something and it's really small, and you think, oh, that's not going to really make a dent in my budget, let us know about it, because maybe we can combine that with funding from another source.
Latoya, I left out State Employees Credit Union and GEAR and all the amazing scholarship programs that you help us get into the hands of students. See, I knew I would leave some out, but we love all our grandchildren the same. So don't tell anybody if I left somebody out. And Finish Line Grant, Zach.
And if I can say one additional thing too, my position is relatively new and was kind of added as we kept getting more and more grants and realizing we needed to focus more on the grant experience for those working on grants at the college. And so our process is still evolving. And so if you are working on a grant and you want some support, technical assistance, professional development, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to work with you to see what we can put together to make sure we're supporting you in successfully running your program.
All right, so I'm going to leave you with the 4 things that I want you to remember. The first thing is what a grant is and what it's not. The second thing is that we're here to help, Kelly, Rebecca, and I. The third thing is that there's other people on campus who have tons of experience with grants that will be happy to help answer questions and steer you in the right direction. And the fourth thing is we need to know what your needs are, always and all the time. All right. I'm going to take no questions to mean you're going to process this, and then we're going to be hearing from all of you very soon. Okay, thanks everybody. Erin, do we need to